Okay, today we are going to be following up on the Sonos launch of the Sonos Ray, which is a mini soundbar. And what we're going to be talking about is the mini sub, which actually didn't launch. Now, about a month ago, I asked a couple of you guys what they are likely to launch in the month of May when we heard about the launch event. And these were the four options that I've placed up, and majority of you, I would say about almost half of the 621 respondents actually said you wanted a Sub Mini. More than the Sonos 3 with the upward firing speaker, and definitely more than the Sonos headphone. Now, the Sonos 3 replacement, the headphone, and the Sub Mini were the top three contenders. But, unfortunately, Sonos didn't launch any of those products, so all of us were wrong. But the Sonos Sub Mini is still high on the agenda, and this is the reason why I believe so. Now, this is no longer a matter of what is logical and what is sensible in the product roadmap. Now, Sonos has a duty to investors. It has a duty to customers like you and me. But the duty to the investors are more often than not new customers and people like us buying more and more stuff. So they've got to balance that out. The Sonos Ray is a mini soundbar priced at $279, which is almost half of that of the Sonos Beam Gen 2, which was released and updated about half a year ago to include Dolby Atmos. The Sonos Ray doesn't support HDMI ARC connection, it only has optical, and thus won't be able to support Atmos as well. So it has entered and created a new budget market. Now, why is the budget market important? Now, I'm going to pull out a chart from my channel. So if you look at this particular chart here, you will notice that most of the visitors, most of the viewers and people coming to this channel, where I kind of like specialize in Sonos stuff, they are between the age of 35 and 44. Now, that age is not old. I mean, I've got to protect myself. It is not an old age group, but it is where you start kind of peaking out in your mid-career and you have a little bit more disposable income. Now, but what about those who are below the age of 35? If you look at the 25 to the 34 age group, they are like even smaller than the age group that is above the 35. So if you think about it, how Sonos intends to target that particular age group, it is through the introduction of a slightly more affordable soundbar. Now, there's no lack of affordable soundbar, and if you look in the China market, you'll find many. I've reviewed one Xiaomi soundbar, which was really cheap, cost tens of dollars, and it was very well received. But it doesn't have the Sonos kick. So how do you introduce Sonos kick to a bigger market, to expand the market? You create the Sonos Ray, which is a mini soundbar and priced below $300 at $279 to be precise. So getting more users on board is not necessarily a bad thing. I do support Sonos in trying to reach out to the younger age group because those people will mature, those people will start making more money in mid-career, and those people will be the people whom we can offload our used items to. So thank you, Sonos, and hang on guys, you will have a bigger market to sell off to next time. And with the introduction of the Sonos Ray soundbar, which is kind of like a budget soundbar and very much smaller, even to fit smaller spaces, you will kind of need a smaller sub if you wanted to augment your whole bass frequencies. Now, the Sonos Sub, the current Gen 3, is currently retailing at a high $749. So $749 as opposed to the Sonos Ray price at $279 is a big gap. It is a huge hurdle to cross, right? And I will talk about the pricing in a bit, but if you are in the market and if you're buying the Sonos Ray, it is really unlikely that you're going to shell out $749 to augment your bass when you are just paying $279 for the soundbar in the first place. So this is one of the reasons why I think the Sonos Sub Mini is still very much on the books. And to really show how serious they are about this, I think they even started talking about the integration of the Sonos Sub Mini into the software. And if you look at this particular screen here, there was actually a leak on the Sonos S2 app itself. So basically the software engineers accidentally or on purpose decided to leak some information on the Sonos S2 app talking about the Sub Mini. So this is about as real as it gets. There are some clues on this, which I will point out the two of them. So the first is that it says that if you are trying to connect a second sub, all right, you need the first sub to be a sub Gen 3, and the second sub can be a sub Gen 1, Gen 2, or Gen 3. But the Sub Mini is not supported. Now, when they say that the Sub Mini is not supported, meaning to say it has created a kind of like an invisible cap on the functionality of the Sub Mini. So you won't actually be able to use them in a dual sub configuration. With the dual sub, some people might think about how about getting two smaller subs. So this move actually kind of ensures that Sonos is not going to cannibalize the biggest sub market with the introduction of a Sub Mini. The second clue here, it says that the Sub Mini is a smaller cylindrical subwoofer. Now, there are plenty of subwoofers around, and most of them are boxy. SVS is an American company that has specialized in producing the PC series, which is the cylindrical subs. And all of them are actually very, very large, and some of them are standing about 3 or 4 feet tall. So they take up quite a lot of space in your room, but this is a small cylindrical subwoofer. It probably looks like the Echo, the Amazon sub that they have, except that I think that is probably a little bit squat and a little bit wide. So I don't know how this is going to compare. I have some idea, which I'll discuss in just a little bit. So knowing that the Sub Mini is a smaller cylindrical subwoofer as leaked in this particular screenshot here on the S2 app itself, I can be quite sure that it is a real product that may be very close on the horizon, probably the second product announcement for later part of this 2022 year. And some of you might think that, hey, Sonos recently bought Mayeth, and that company produces very small speakers that produces very large sound. And with that $100 million acquisition, it sounds like the Sonos Sub Mini is something that would have sprung out from that particular acquisition. But do bear in mind that this particular screenshot was leaked way before Mayeth was ever announced in the acquisition. But do bear in mind that such M&A activities, mergers and acquisition activities, take a little bit of time to negotiate. So they could have already started working on these stuff while the negotiations were happening. Even after the negotiations have settled, they still need to do their due diligence in order to check that every fact is presented accurately, and no one is leading anybody on in such acquisition, because this is $100 million you're talking about. So the last thing I'm going to be talking about here is that because the Sub Mini is not supported, there could be many reasons. One is an artificial cap to ensure that it doesn't cannibalize the sale of the larger Sub Gen 3. The other reason could simply be because of the fact that the Sub Mini could be a sealed design, right? Because if it is cylindrical and if it is small, sometimes they do use a port to enhance the bass abilities, but because it's cylindrical, there is a chance that the drivers are firing downwards, and when the drivers are firing downwards, the whole bass frequency is being reinforced by the floor in any case. So you may not need the port to achieve certain frequencies. But when you try to pair a ported sub together with a sealed sub, then you get all sorts of issues with the sound. So it might not be technically easy to integrate the sound between a sealed subwoofer and all the ported designs of the Sub Gen 1, Gen 2 and the Gen 3. So the two more things I'd like to talk about. The first is the form factor of this mini sub, and the second is the price point. Now I'm going to be pulling up all the soundbars that Sonos currently has, and this is the Sonos Ray. The Sonos Ray comes in at 56 centimeters. Then you have the Sonos Beam Gen 2 or the Beam Gen 1. It comes in at 65 centimeters, so that's a good almost 4 inches larger than the Sonos Ray. And of course, you have the Sonos and you have the Sonos Arc, and the Sonos Arc comes in at 114 centimeters, almost 4 feet, double the length of the Sonos Ray and the Sonos Beam, almost around there. All right, and then I will bring in the dimensions of the Sonos Sub. If we look at the Sonos Sub from the front view it measures 39 centimeters high and 40 centimeters across. And that is about 1/3 the size of the Sonos Arc. It is a relatively large subwoofer, but bear in mind that the Sub has been around for a very long time, even before the Arc was introduced 2 years ago. And when you start looking at the Sub, it kind of like looks proportionally perfect to the Sonos Arc. Moving to the side view, the Sonos Sub Gen 3 is 16 centimeters deep. So when you pair it up, it doesn't take up a lot of space. It is one of the more compact subwoofers around in the market, regardless of brands, and it does pack quite a punch. So in itself, it is already pretty small, but the price is not small. But I'll be talking about the price in a while, so just bear with me. So for the Sonos Sub Mini, you're looking at a dimension that you want to be able to fit together with the Sonos Ray and the Sonos Beam. So a lot of us with the Sonos Beam before this, right, we're thinking, oh, we may want the Sub to help with the bass duties, but the Sub is kind of expensive and it's kind of like large, so it might overpower some of our rooms, especially if our rooms aren't that big. So if you think about what a cylindrical format does, it will kind of shrink the footprint of this particular Sub Gen 3 that we are looking at here. I have some speculation on the size, and let me share with you what I think. Again, this is not influenced by anybody. I don't know anything beyond what you and everybody else knows, but this is just my speculation. This is a cylindrical Sub format. Now, if it is 20 centimeters in diameter, which is about 8 inches, and if you try to size it accordingly, it could go up to be about 37 centimeters. And at 37 centimeters, it is slightly shorter, about over an inch shorter than the current Sub Gen 3. But the side view of it slightly wider, and it will occupy half the space when looked on from the front view. So 20 centimeters is half of about 40 centimeters for the Sub Gen 3. Now, if you think that the Sub Gen 3 is proportionally perfect to the Sonos Arc, when you try to halve the size of the Sonos Arc to the Beam or even to the Ray today, that's about halving the size of the subwoofer. So that's why I put a 20 centimeters diameter for the Sub Mini. But the Sub Mini, at 20 centimeters, it should be able to house a slightly smaller than 8-inch cone if it were to be firing downwards, because you still need a bit of space to mount those things. But 20 centimeters is actually not the smallest. It still takes up quite a bit of space, although it will be mini as compared to the Sub Gen 3. But I have another speculation. I think they might actually make this look really, really cute. And if they were able to reduce it to, say, this dimension, 16 centimeters, just more than 6.5 inches across in diameter, it will make for a very cutesy subwoofer. And at 30 centimeters high, it's really going to fit on a lot of tables and a lot of TV consoles. And proportionally, I think it will be perfect for the 56 centimeters Sonos Ray or the 65 centimeters Sonos Beam. And I do think that they will be able to shrink it down from the 8-inch to the 6-inch if they are able to integrate the Mayer technology in terms of putting in more power, in terms of putting in more sound, putting out more sound from a small speaker. So I do hope that the Mayer acquisition bears fruit and they come up with something really, really small and sounds really, really big. But of course, the whole idea of sizing is not all that it is. I said that there were two things I wanted to discuss. One was the form factor, which we have already gone through. The next is the pricing. Now, this chart I've assembled here, you will notice that I put a price for the Sub Mini right there. It is not the actual price. It is not something that I know. I am speculating that the Sub Mini is going to cost $449. Okay. Now, there are a few colors that you see on the screen here. On the horizontal axis, you'll see that there are a few soundbars. So before the Ray was introduced, there were two. There was the Beam and the Sonos Arc. But with the introduction of the Ray at $279, Sonos now has soundbars ranging all the way from $279 to $899. So that is pretty expensive, more than 3 times the price difference between the cheapest and the most expensive. So I've highlighted in green the options that are available today before the launch of the Sonos Ray. Yes, you can put in the order for the Sonos Ray, but you won't be able to get your hands on it right now. The Sonos Beam and the Sonos Arc could be paired with a Sonos Sub Gen 3. You could be shelling out close to $1,200 for the Sonos Beam and the Sonos Sub Gen 3, or you could be shelling out $1,648 when you buy the Sonos Arc and the Sub Gen 3 combinations. So those two were the only combinations that you were looking at. Now, when you introduce the Sonos Ray, right, at $279, then pairing it with the Sub Gen 3, suddenly it really doesn't make sense because you're spending less than $300 on the soundbar, and yet you're going to have to shell out $749 for the sub. For most of the target audience of the Sonos Ray, the Sonos Sub Gen 3 is kind of like going to be out of reach. If you're going to be spending that kind of money, you might already move up to the Beam anyway. I've highlighted the $1028 in red because I think that is an unlikely combination. It will still mean that if you want a subwoofer with any of the Sonos soundbar, you're going to be spending in excess of $1,000. So Sonos has moved from 2 combinations to 3 combinations with the introduction of the Sonos Ray. Now, if Sonos were to bring in the Sonos Sub Mini, suddenly the combination of the soundbars with the subs doubles to 6. So this is moving from 2 combinations of soundbars and subwoofers to 6 combinations in total. So when I speculate that the price of the Sonos Sub Mini is at $449, there is some logic and there's some thinking that I have behind this. And when you try to pair it up with the Sonos Arc, it is an unlikely combination. You're spending almost $900 on the Sonos Arc. You are quite unlikely to cheap out on the Sonos Sub Mini because it is $449. So I've highlighted in red $1,349. If you're going to be spending $1,300 over dollars, you might as well move up and get the Sub Gen 3 at $1,648 when you're getting the Sonos Arc. Not to mention that it will sound a little bit more coherent because the Sonos Arc is going to be a much more capable soundbar and you want to pair it with a capable sub as well. But for the Sonos Beam, when you price it at $449, you could technically increase your performance by spending another $449 on the Sub Mini. So for those of you who where pricing is a concern, it fits in and slots in perfectly. For those of you who are concerned about disturbing your neighbors because you're living in a flat or in an apartment, then that is also a way to help you get away with it, right? So you don't have to put a badass Sub Gen 3 there. You could get away with a much smaller sub and hopefully it doesn't disturb your neighbors that much. And when you combine the two together, you're spending $898. So for the first time ever, well, I can't say that because they haven't launched the Sub Mini, but with the Sub Mini launch, and if it comes in at $449, it would have allowed Sonos users to get a soundbar and sub combination below $1,000 because the combined total of the Beam and the Sub Mini is going to be $898. So not only just below $1,000, it's even below $900. So this is new territory for Sonos, and I do agree with them why they need to do this if they wanted to attract the much younger audience. Then things get a lot more interesting when you move on to the Ray, because when combined with the Ray at $279, the $449 Sub Mini brings the total system price to $728, which is a very palatable price considering the fact that prior to this release of the Sonos Ray and potentially the Sonos Sub Mini, you weren't able to get a soundbar and a subwoofer combination for anything less than $1,200. So now this option is available at $728. So that sounds really, really sweet, even without considering the technical aspect or the placement aspect or the physical aspect. The price point actually makes sense. So it doesn't even have to be cylindrical. As long as they price something smaller at about $449, I think that makes perfect sense. And one last thing before we move on to talk about the next thing, it's still related to pricing. I just want to talk about the fact that if you buy an Arc today, you're going to be spending $899, right? But look at this combination of the Sonos Beam together with the Sub Mini, right? You are looking at $898. So for almost the same price, the consideration then becomes, do you get an ARC without a sub, or do you get the Beam Gen 2 if you wanted Atmos with the sub for the same price? So this is the reason why I think the Sub Mini pricing at $449 is going to be a pretty real thing. And combined with the Sonos Ray, it's going to come in at $728. So from the perspective of someone who is considering the ARC, they might even save some money. Instead of spending $899 on the Sonos ARC, get the Sonos Ray combination with the Sub Mini and save $170 at $728. So I think if they do release the Sonos Sub Mini, this is going to get really interesting, and that combination will probably be one of the most asked questions on the internet at that point in time when they launch. And the question is, do you buy the ARC on its own, or do you buy a smaller subwoofer with a smaller soundbar for the same price or even less? So the next thing I want to talk about is this particular chart here. Now I have readjusted the price of the Sub Mini. There is a potential that they will price it at $349. Well, of course, it is great for us, but would Sonos do that? I don't know. I think they can get away with charging $449, but if they do price it at $349, it's going to bring the system price of the Sonos Ray with the Sonos Sub Mini down to $628. That price point is just mind-blowing. It's $349 for a small sub to augment the bass coming from the Sonos Ray. I think that becomes more palatable, because if the Ray is $279, pricing the sub at $449 might get a little bit hard to decide for some people. But when you price it at $349, then it becomes very much comparable. It is still more expensive, the Sub Mini, than the Sonos Ray, but the price becomes a lot more palatable. So spend almost $300 and you double it to $628, you get a full system 5.1 with a sub. And of course, that brings the Beam and the Sub Mini combination down to below $800, which is going to help Sonos gain so much more market share. And I haven't even started talking about the ability of the Sub Mini to pair with the music speakers like the Sonos Ones or the Sonos Play 5s. The Play 5s, maybe I doubt that, because the Play 5's bass is actually very good on its own. I don't think that I don't even think that the Sub Gen 3 is going to lend a lot to the Sonos 5s, so let alone the Sonos Sub Mini. So if you have a Sonos 5 and they do launch the Sub Mini, I think it is probably not something that you want to get, but it will definitely help to enhance the sound that is coming from your Sonos One if you are rocking that system, right? And the Sonos One is $200 for one speaker, $400 for both. And when you pair it up with a Sonos Sub Mini at below $400, then the whole consideration changes, the whole game changes. I think that is a very, very great price. That's a good price for people who are going into music and are pairing up with the ones. Not to even mention the picture frame from IKEA, and IKEA has the bookshelf. IKEA also has the lamp, which should pair very well with the Sonos Sub Mini. So I hope you have enjoyed this make-believe trip that I have. This is something that's going on in my head, and I've been thinking about what Sonos is trying to do, and I do think that there is a very, very good chance that Sonos will be releasing the Sonos Sub Mini towards the end of this year. It's either that or the headphones, which the papers have been leaked almost a year ago. Until today, it's still not there. But with the acquisition of Mayeth, I think that could be something that is on the horizon. If it doesn't pan out this year, it will most likely pan out next year. It's just that within these 2 years, this Sub Mini is going to come. At what price point? I don't know. Maybe I guessed it correctly. So stay tuned and we will talk about it if and when it launches. And I'll see you in my next video.